development. So both, database applications and websites for mostly for clinical researchers, but also for community-based organizations. Some of them do really cool work. So I have a foot in the nonprofit world, but and I just do the tech stuff because what I make a living from, and I enjoy it. But it's not sort of where I wouldn't say it's where my heart is. It's just sort of like crossword puzzles that I get paid for.
Right on.
All right. Marc Pearson in the house. Wow, this is a powerhouse group we have all of a sudden. This is getting real interesting. What's up, Marc?
Hey, I'm out on a walk with my dog, but I thought any chance to hear more about what's going on down there, I'd just join and listen in.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here, Marc. Josh, do you remember I mentioned Marc before in a previous call, Marc and Carrie? All right.
I'm not sure, Marc. What is? Remind me what you're doing. What your relationship is with Sonora?
Well, I'm a friend of Chris's, and anyone that's a friend of his is a friend of mine. He found me by just running into a talk I'd given on Stafford Beer's viable system model, and Carrie and I are working with neighborhoods, and he's just the kind of guy we wanted to meet. So it's been great. That doesn't say much, but I'll let Chris tell you because he knows.
Hey, you guys are close, right? I mean, where you're based out of Oregon, is that right, Marc?
I'm in Bellingham, Washington.
Washington, right?
Okay.
So anyway, closer to you,
I'm
Dan.
in Fort Bragg at the moment, so we're all kind of like on this like coastal axis here. Yeah.
Yeah.
The best coast.
So
No argument there.
when we have people who are there's like the get it done, but also like being thoughtful about what it is that we're getting done and how it is that we're doing the thing that we're doing. All of you have that conscientious thing going, and I think that because we don't have a lot of taking it personally here, it'd be good to just be real about like what do we need to do and what are the focuses to get more going for regenerating Sonora. And something that I heard really clearly from all of you at this point is to narrow the focus a bit. Well, Marc might have other things to say about this, but we've been going through this process where we did the causal loop diagram mapping of the system of Superior. We started to look at where there's variables that we have high impact on the system and high influence to actually affect those variables. And then that kind of brought us down into working on the stuff with the garden, working on Leo's, and that's like advancing the commons here at Leo's, doing stuff with the garden to generate capital, and then exploration around land usage, like trying to make it easier to create community land trusts here in Superior, and then entrepreneurship in big quotes. These are like the areas that we had synthesized it down to up to that point.
Great.
And then it became where do we go from here? And even with those things, I was hearing from both you, Josh, and you, Dan, that that's probably still too many things. So that's where we're at. Yeah.
Actually, Chris, I think you have narrowed it down. I think if you can say, here's 4 things I want to do, and I think you just said that. I want to do garden, I want to do Leo's, I want to have a land trust, and I want to do entrepreneurship. I mean, even that, I think I haven't heard things as focused as that before. So that seems good.
If I could throw in one idea here that might ease the tension on focus, and I learned this explicitly from what I want to say from Christopher Alexander in the work that they did in Eugene, Oregon, and that would be to divide up your efforts into really short-term projects, medium-term, and long-term. So that, I mean, the things that may take you, like the land trust, might take you 5 years to get going. So you could have one long-term thing that's going to have big impact, but if you don't invest in short and medium term, you're going to lose all your momentum. So it's just a portfolio. But the long-term ones don't have to be paying off right away, as long as people see there's something to do and they're getting near-term results. So I'll quit talking.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And and duration is one of these questions, right, Mark, in the 6 questions process. So what's the duration? And so we use the durations or sprint cycles of the lunar cycles. So we have a lunar year and a lunar month, and then multiple of any of those things is how we've been organizing as people here doing the work. So we've got stuff immediately, like Dan just helped us fix the electrical today. He took down a bunch
Right.
of lights that needed to come down like that. Like this is a big upgrade and something within this lunar cycle. And then we have multiple ones too. Dan, you also brought into the mix this distinction of these different roles, like the director of operations, the project manager, the lead for that project, and the materials procurement person. So just thinking about the outline of some of these roles to get projects done has been helpful, because I start to think about how we can frame getting money to pay for people to have the paid positions to do these jobs. We can be explicit about the roles and what they're doing that directly relate to getting projects done. So Josh, where we left off was you saying, okay, like there's a lot here and you need some paid staff to do it if we want to really do it. And that speaks to me because I need to pay my bills and I have this existential thing going on with having a child coming and saying like, I don't bring in any income for my household right now. Problem. So this is one way that can do that if we have the right path forward. But I don't want it to just be salary for me. Maybe that's how it is the first year if we can't get enough funding. But ultimately, I want people to be paid for their work. And this is another tension that Mark and I have about it. And it's just like, at the very least, the nonprofit organization needs probably 3 people as soon as we can. So now we've got, yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to agree with what Mark said about and apply it to what you just said, Chris, is that there probably is a short, medium, and long. Just like it's going to take a while, I think, to get up to the point of getting funded. I think I said to you in an email. I mean, 3 people, you're talking about, even if they're part-time, you're talking about a minimum of $100,000 with benefits or whatever it is that, some people will be getting, or the basic budget you're going to have. And that going from 0 to $100,000 usually doesn't happen in 6 months. It's going to take, that might be a few years. And so, as you say, maybe the first year, you're just getting, one salary, maybe an executive director's salary. I think I'm so much I think Dan with the lights is sort of like me with like the grant writing. It's like, okay, I know there's all these really big plans, but like I want you to get your first grant for $50,000 from a community foundation, and what's like the line from here to there. And it might be a few months, it might be as much as a year to get there. But I'm really hyper focused on on that part of it, as long as it fits within your much bigger vision, because you have a much bigger vision, and of course that's got to guide all these things. But I also just want to, I want to get those things in train. I want to get the grant applications out. I want to find out, what are the programs that you want to define that would make a corporation or a foundation say, great, we'd love to write you a check.
Yep. So you've heard our areas of focus. We've got a garden. You've been to the garden. You've been to Leo's. You see some of what we've got going on, right? So where do you think we go from here?
I can give you my thoughts, but I'd love to hear what Dan and Mark think.
Let's round robin it.
I've been brainstorming on how to get money, because that's really the only problem, right? If we can't solve the money problem, then we're just some do-gooders with the rakes and shovels, and that's as far as as far as it'll ever go.
True.
So we have to crack the nut on money, and I spent a lot of years in Rotary. And that's essentially the whole purpose of membership, is to fundraise. And so I kind of have a whole bag of tricks that we did during that Rotary time. And I was suggesting that. And I was also suggesting to Chris that Rotary may be something that he would want to join, or at a minimum, find a Rotarian that will be his advocate, because Rotary's got hundreds of millions of dollars. And they give that away annually to enormous amounts of money to projects. And the key to to get in that money is to have an advocate and to get your crap together early on and have your grant in place, you know, the day before the grants come open, because that's essentially what happens is who's in first of the line gets the money, and the late people, you know, have to wait till next year and try again.
Great.
But that was really an easy pickings, and it does put a lot of weight on Chris's shoulders because he's got to, you know, go make that inroad and find a contact and
Yep.
you know, spark the interest. But there's also a lot of things I thought that he could learn from Rotary just in general, as far as how to use their network, how to solicit, you know, funding, how to tap intellectual resource from that community in all of the various pies he's got his fingers in. There's a ton of people there, and really all they're doing is looking for a mission.
Mhm.
And if you can show up and be a little charismatic and present your mission in a way that makes sense, you can immediately align or overnight align with thousands of people that are pointed in your direction. And that's when the resources and money and those things, the path gets a little shorter. So I highly recommended that type of involvement. And then just trying to brainstorm on what we can use Chris's resources like the Leo or the garden to generate money, like some sort of Airbnb type rental on one of the properties that we could all, you know, have a barn raising and build in a, you know, month or something. Or, you know, events at Leo's or some sort of equipment. If we could purchase some rental equipment that would be needed here in the town, that could be, you know, something that Leo's provides as a service, but, you know, costs money. That we can fund, you know, the different projects with, but those are just some over the last couple of days that I've been here poking around my nose into Chris's business.
Great.
And then doing lots of handyman stuff. And took off the security door and pulled out a bunch of old 8-foot fixtures. Been looking at a lot of structural situations and grading and drainage, and it's been actually a real fun vacation.
Let's pass the talking stick, as it were. So Josh, you were about to speak as well, and then let's hear from Mark too.
Actually, I'd love to hear what Mark has to say. I've done some talking. I'd love to hear what Mark has to say too.
Well, it's sort of a little bit of a hodgepodge when it comes to this. I think the main point I want to make is really obvious, and that is whatever you do, don't get ahead of your funding, because you'll collapse, and that'll create cynicism and disappointment and all kind of stuff. So I can't remember this guy's name. It was a guy I think I've shared, Carrie and I have shared the video with you. He's an old guy like me, but he's out in the West Coast. But he created a community development co-op, a corporation actually, on the East Coast, when a community he moved into, white guy teacher moved into a black community, because he asked one of his students' parents, how can I get to understand the situation that, you know, the black kids in the school, which predominantly black school, and then they said, well, you need to move into the neighborhood. So he did. Okay. And it was a, you know, white flight kind of thing. And he took on a bunch of national people. They ended up creating a self-funding corporation. They became a local real estate company. They ended up buying and providing housing. And that was essentially a co-op that was created. So I'll send, does that sound familiar to you, Chris? Have we shared that with you?
Yeah, I watched the video on your Vimeo of the
Yeah,
interview
good.
with him, and I'm just relating it back to Dan's lamentations that he's expressed here about there being a real estate cartel, that at least that feeling of not being able to get things done because
Yeah. So I think that the two things that I see missing that one could think about doing, would be local finance, basically, I mean, there's all kind of regulations, but basically a local deal where you can loan small amounts of money immediate. So that's a thing that really tends to stop progress. And then housing. So those are the two things that I could see that could make money while doing good. Because I'm trying to stick with the idea, because some of my more negative thoughts about money. But I think those two are the two examples I have to offer. There's nothing wrong with making money and getting paid and all that. It's
As long as
fatal.
it's beneficial to all concerned, right?
Yeah, and as long as you don't rely on sources that are going to dry up, and then the whole thing's going to collapse. I was just trying to do the math in my head. I don't know, more than $20 million in grant funding in my career. And I don't think any of it made any difference. It actually all made things worse, except for the money that came from the local community. If the money came from the local community, I got $1 million from the hospital and $1 million from the local payer. That transformed the community. Every time it came from outside of the county, it actually ended up being a big distraction. We got things moving that couldn't survive without the funding. So I'm not opposed to doing anything that makes money, anything ethical, as long as you don't end up collapsing because of it. The other thing, Chris, I wanted to say, and we could work on it tomorrow if you were interested, is to do a quick causal loop diagram of grant funding.
Oh yeah, that sounds good.
I think it'd be pretty quick and easy. Probably have 7 or 8 nodes and we'd be done. But at least, have a conversation about when to take what kind of grants. But I'm much more along the lines of figure out a way to have businesses that the community loves owning that makes money for the community. And that should be things that are obviously a benefit to the community. In other words, you don't want to have a community owned SpaceX or something like that. It's literally cool. So that's all the other thing that I think about all the time, and it's because of the stage I am in life, but I'm influenced every day by Ward and the kind of products that they create as volunteers. So the thing I would say, I would want most of your effort to come from, I don't mean you personally, the most of the effort should come from people who make their money somewhere else and are essentially volunteering, skilled volunteers. It'd be harder to get a more skilled programmer than Ward, and but try to create a situation where people who either have already made enough money to live on, or they're working and it's so meaningful that they'd rather do that than do other things. That's it. I've spoken too long, but I think that's all I have to offer.
I hear your words. I thank you. And I love what I'm seeing with your camera. Josh. Woo.
There's my dog.
Fern Gully.
Let's see. So Mark and Dan, you're both talking to some degree about social entrepreneurship, right? You're both talking about finding ways to have income generating businesses that fund the effort. So when we say entrepreneurship, we're talking about, I think, two different things. One is the concept of social entrepreneurship, which is Regen Sonora is the entrepreneur that makes the money that funds the programs. And then we're also about entrepreneurship in terms of that being a program that could really support Superior, that people could be supported and start their own businesses. So when I say the word entrepreneurship, I don't want to confuse those two.
Yeah, it's a fractal. I think they're really nicely
So
interconnected.
I think they're very different things, and how great to be able to generate your own income. The problem is, if you're doing it through business, you're competing with other people who are doing businesses. right? There's it's hard to do. You have to like be a business owner and run a successful business, which is hard in itself. I think Mark's pointing out the great thing about that is it stays local. You're not then beholden to somebody else. But then you've just got to like run a business and make money like anybody else, and that's its own challenge. So I don't have much experience with that. I know about making businesses and I know about nonprofits, but I don't really know about making a business to generate income to fund the nonprofit. I've known people who do that, but I haven't done it. I'm much more involved in getting grant and contract money. And my thing has been local because I've been doing that in the Bay Area where there is a ton of local money and you can get local money to support local projects. In Superior, not so much. There isn't necessarily a really big family foundation that's going to write you big checks at this point. So I think it's going to be taking into account the warnings that we're hearing about not getting ahead of the money. I think the question is, how do you get some programs right now that can start injecting enough juice into you so that, Chris, you can keep on doing this and work, bring in as much volunteer time as you can, but of course, like be working towards getting paid staff because there's a big difference between paid staff and volunteers. And I'm thinking that it starts with an injection of it's money from people who believe in you, who say, I think you've got a really good program. Well, let's start you off and see what happens if we give you a year's worth of funding or 6 months worth of funding, and let's see how things go. So that's how I'm imagining it, is starting with it, because I think actually starting up buy equipment and get some rentals, see where that goes. Start selling some organic soil and see where that goes. Chris, I have a little bit of skepticism that you're really going to be able to pay your rent off the soil you're going to be selling from.
So does Mark.
Yeah. I mean, great idea. Do it. Why not? But I'm just not sure that's going to be enough income for you. When I think of Leo's and I think of the gardens, I think that's something that your heart's in and a bunch of people have come together for it. I think it's a great starting part. I don't know whether it's going to get you the funding you need to start with or not. So we should do some research, find out who might be interested in funding things like that. But I think people will see it as, what would you call it, Dan? The do-gooders with shovels, and I think that's the way it might be seen. And I think in some way to get that first injection of some operating income, I think you're going to need some slightly audacious programs.
Well, here's the way that, and I hear you on that, and what it gets me thinking about is what Dan talked about earlier, because we were talking about what's the clear, coherent message and story about what's going on that we'll be able to communicate to people like at the Rotary clubs or whatever. And he was talking about Leo's being the main story, and it's how it's enabling people in the community to do meaningful work that's going to help their neighborhood. And for us, how we're applying that is with the gardens and stuff, but that's just one thing out of all these other things that are going on. And that relates a lot to what, Mark, you've been talking about Leo's being like the neighborhood development center. And that coalesces with a lot of things.
To make that the plot of the story is Leo's. And then what we can do from Leo's become the 3 subplots that we're going to mention, the garden and other, 2 other meaningful at the top of the list. And that way you can still present these community projects that are more removed from this funding request. So you can still kind of toot your horn a little bit about all the things that are happening, and all of that is happening because of Leo's. And that's the point.
I'm going to just admit I'm kind of I light up when you talk about the entrepreneurship, because I think for outsiders it's sort of a way to. I think even maybe even more expensive than Leo's as a center of the story. I think the center of the story is Superior. We want to make it a better place to live. It's a great place, and we are trying to enable it to meet all of its potential. And Leo's is the place where that happens. That's like the treehouse that everything flows from. But then I think a question is, and what are you going to do to make Superior work better for the people who live there? And gardens is one. And all the activity that happened at Leo's are there. And I kind of feel like part of the issue is just people need to have employment. People need to be making money and making businesses, and the businesses that you make in Superior will generate on themselves. So like I start a bakery, and now I get to start employing kids from the high school, and and that leads to more and more things. I think people, look, I'll just admit that I'm excited about that one. I feel like that's something that makes a really tangible, visible change. And that's the kind of thing people do get excited about. But there's a lot to know about entrepreneurship and how to develop entrepreneurship. And I'm not that person. And Chris, I don't know if you know the people who are those people. So I know that was identified by your, at that point, board as something that they were excited about. Is that kind of the program that is the visible expression of what you want to develop in Superior?
Go, Mark.
I'm with you on, I would say jobs, and they have to be new jobs, because,
Good work.
so I think, so we agree. John, it's nice to meet
Josh.
you, by the way. It's
I'm
nice
Josh.
Josh, I'm sorry. It's
Nice to meet you
really
too, Mark.
small on here. Josh, yeah. So, Chris, I wondered if it would be appropriate for you to share a screen. The last thing I sent you, I don't know, sometime last week, was that kind of busy diagram of infrastructure and all the jobs that should come from infrastructure. I'd love to get these wise gentlemen's input on the possibility.
Yeah, I'll do that. Before I do, Dan, thoughts on what's been shared?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all kind of heading in the same way. It's not going to fund itself, and we're going to have a runway before you're, cashing any checks. And in the interim of that time, we have to figure out the entrepreneurial key, to bridge us into the future. And the thing in my book that rings all the bells and doesn't interfere with the local community, I guess, or minimally, is some sort of short-term rental situation or long-term rental situation. We've got access to different types of property. It'd just be a matter of if we could use those for profit or not.
Well, can I ask a quick question? Because I think I hear a legitimate concern about doing things that conflict with local businessmen. So the key assessment I wish I had here, out, in the valley is who actually is getting paid for your core